Hello and welcome to Cricket8 Podcast. I'm Megha. Joining me here is Jarrod Kimber. And the Champions Trophy is a month away, little over a month away, but we're already excited over here. And that's why we are going to be discussing about what India's squad for the Champions Trophy is going to look like. But before that, India also play ODIs against England. They haven't played a whole lot of ODIs after the World Cup. In fact, lost that series to Sri Lanka, couldn't manage a single win from that series. But things don't really look good for India at the moment, considering what happened in tests and overall form meter, form of the top Indian batters. But let's start by talking about Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma, their form, how much of that test drought is going to affect their ODI run.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think you ever want to be in a situation with champion players where you get rid of them too soon. And you've got the Champions Trophy coming up, and that's quite an important thing, right? So we completely understand that. Rohit's form, if we believe that this is the end, looks like it's come very quickly for him, right? Sometimes that happens. To me, I'm a little bit more skeptical that that is the case, that suddenly there's no form here at all. Virat averaged 72 at a run a ball in ODI cricket last year. If all of his problems are being caught in the cordon, how many slip fielders are England going to have for him in an ODI game with the white ball, right? So I kind of feel that there's no reason to make any huge decisions on Virat. And with Rohit, I think you have to give not even just the benefit of the doubt, but also you have to be, when a player's form has dropped so massively in such a short period of time, I think you have to be thinking as a selector or a manager or, coach, whatever that may be, more along the lines of, well, the situation here is that he might have just got into bad form and it's looking worse because he's old, right? And I think if that's the case, I think they need to make those decisions. But I don't know. Where is your head at with these two guys at the moment?
It looks interesting because ahead of the Champions Trophy and considering ODI form per se, India is not expected, Indian selectors are not expected to take any knee-jerk reactions. Had it been a test series, things probably with World Test Championship out of sight would have changed dramatically, drastically, but not really for the Champions Trophy. Because you brought up this point, Virat's dismissals, and because it is such a hot topic at the moment. Now, left arm spinners, we've seen Virat struggle against those. There was a point of time when he was really thriving against that variety. And now cordon has been Virat's issue for the longest time. 2014, he struggled massively against James Anderson. But then 2018, visiting the same country, looked fairly comfortable, scored truckloads of runs. So kind of made a comeback as far as that sort of dismissal is concerned. What is exactly ailing him now? We all know what the issue is. Virat knows it better than any of us. Yet the same thing is happening. He changed his stance a bit as well, tweaked it. He is to negate the swing. He has tried to come in front of the crease as well, fairly well. So how do you see that changing, and what exactly is ailing Virat?
No, I mean, essentially, he doesn't like to leave the ball, and teams are bowling wide to him in a way that eventually he's going to get an edge. And, in this sort of wobble ball era, the pace-playing pandemic, almost got that out, pace-playing pandemic, everyone's nicking more than they ever have before, right? Like the averages have come way down against seam bowling. So at the moment, there's probably only two options. One is he stops trying to play everything with a straight bat. And when it is really wide, he starts trying to just slash it away and just say, okay, well, I'm just going to take every boundary as it comes available to me. And the other option is to go defensive and to leave the ball. It doesn't look like he has that within his game. So if we look at one-day cricket, as you said, no one's really played any one-day cricket since the last World Cup. It's actually kind of hilarious. We have a Champions Trophy coming up and no one's played any one-day cricket. At least it's in the subcontinent again. So you certainly have the elements of the pitches being similar. So everyone should understand what they're doing. But that suggests to me that he's not about to nick off a whole bunch of times in the Champions Trophy, right? So I would probably be leaning towards the fact that he has made a kabillion runs in ODI cricket. And, I think he's played 3 ODIs this year and hasn't made any runs, but I wouldn't be too worried about that. As I said, last year it was 72. 2022, he averaged 27. And 2021, he's averaged in the 40s. So while his test average has dropped. His ODI average has not, right? Certainly not at a sort of consistent rate. So I think you go with him. And then if you look at Rohit Sharma, again, 3 ODIs this year. There's not much to go on there. Last year in ODI cricket, he was averaging over 50. Having said that, earlier this year, he was making a lot of runs in Test cricket.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you look at the way they were both hitting the ball in the T20 World Cup, unless you think that Rohit has dropped off a cliff since then, I'm not particularly that worried about it. But what do you think India will do? It seems like a big decision to make. Like, who is the person who drops both of them, meaning that they have to replace the captain and they have to replace the biggest star player right now? Like, Ajit Agarkar's not going to make that decision. Gautam Gambhir, I find it hard to make that he will make that decision because of where he currently is within the setup and everything else. Is Jay Shah going to get on the phone? It looks like he's off creating a super league on the side at the moment, right? So who's the person who's going to make that call? It's not a particularly easy one. We saw that with England when they were trying to get rid of Jimmy Anderson as well. You know, like, we knew for a while out that there was a chance that Jimmy Anderson was going to get flicked. One of the big conversations was, who's the person who makes that call? Because, you know, it's not a particularly easy thing for someone to just go up to a legend and go, your time's done.
And it looked easier in Test because the first Test, Jasprit Bumrah led, Rohit Sharma wasn't available. India won comprehensively and then subsequently could not replicate that performance. Jasprit Bumrah was the captain. India knew who to turn to. Had Jasprit Bumrah not been available for the 5th Test, then we would have seen what India would have done, because then the choice probably would not have been as straightforward. Virat Kohli taking over from Rohit Sharma being rested or opting to rest, it would have all gotten really complicated. And the rumors suggest that Virat Kohli is going to be around for some time. He's certainly fit. There's no question about that. And as far as the runs are concerned, he did score a whole lot of runs last year. Now, there's a question around the pitches. AJ says, who will have a say in the pitches of Dubai ICC event? ICC is supposed to take a call. That also brings into question. Now, when India was playing against Sri Lanka, Indian batters struggled massively in the ODI series. And once again, the issue that surfaced was, if the wicket is assisting spin a whole lot, India didn't look as comfortable. Dubai would not really be overwhelmingly supporting spinners. Is that something that you'd assume?
I mean, generally it does, doesn't it? So I would assume that there would be some help from the spinners there. No, I think you're right. That series that India had problems with, there was a lot of spin on offer. I think I would say, Megha, there is a slight different level between the spinners of Sri Lanka and Pakistan. You know, the Pakistan spinners of recent times haven't quite looked at that. You know, at the same amount. So I wouldn't be too worried about that at that point. But yes, I would say, and it is the ICC who's going to make those decisions, and I would assume that the ICC will come along and they will say, we just want the wicket to play normally. So whatever is usually happening at that time of year in Dubai is what we should be seeing.
And again, coming back to India's squad selection, Yashasvi Jaiswal, he's yet to make his ODI debut. Whatever opportunities he has received across other formats, such as Test and T20Is, he has given a great account of himself. So do you see him getting a look in, at least in the squad? And if he comes in the squad, how do things look from there?
Sorry, your microphone just nipped out for a minute. I didn't quite hear that.
So Yashasvi Jaiswal, if he gets a look in the squad, does he, first of all? And if he does, how do things look from there on?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think when I don't think before a Champions Trophy they need to make a change. Who I'm trying to think who's been opening for India of recent times in the ODI. So it was Rohit,
Gill and Sharma.
Oh, Gill, of course, yeah. I don't see any reason to change that. Do you?
None, unless we get back to the second point that we were discussing, which is too drastic to happen at the moment.
I can't imagine. What do you think has to happen for Rohit or Virat not to be in the Champions Trophy? I just don't see the advantage of not picking them. You would have to be so with Rohit, it would have to be you're watching him in the nets and you're just like, it's gone. He's just gone. sometimes it's not that, it doesn't happen that often, but sometimes players, especially very natural players like him, it just goes. The eyes go, the feet go, whatever it may be, and it doesn't work anymore. There is a possibility that happens here. I can certainly see that as an option, but I just find it very, very unlikely that is about to happen.
And again, as champion players, because you do not give up, you get to where you get to. And then for them to take that call on their own, to not feature in something like Champions Trophy, where there's a trophy on offer, an ICC trophy, something that India have been deprived of for a decade. Obviously, T20 World Cup happened, but in the ODI format came so close in during the 2023 ODI World Cup. So all of that, obviously, you'd want to stick around as far as a player is concerned.
Yeah, especially, I think if you're an older player, like we don't know outside of IPLs how many trophies these two are going to be around for, right? It just feels like to me it would be such a drastic decision for either of them to pull the pin, unless, as I said, Rohit's looking at his, Rohit's looking at his form and just going, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore. It doesn't work anymore," right? Which is fine. Like, I mean, if a player just decides that, you have to accept it. It would be very weird timing a month out for a Champions Trophy. We've seen it before, though. Like, I don't want to pretend like we've never seen something like this happen. These things do happen quite a bit. But yeah, so I wouldn't be thinking that is a situation. Just on a couple of other questions here. So Mag has said, can't Gill be replaced by Yashasvi? Tough call, but probably beneficial. That would be, if you start dropping people who are averaging over 50 in the format, you are essentially setting yourself up for none of your players to ever trust you again. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's not untrue. If it's a player who's played like 5 or 10 games, if it's like Dawid Malan or Karan Nair, right, it's a bit different. Shubman Gill has been dominating, right, for a long period of time now. If you drop him, no player is ever going to feel comfortable playing for India again. They are going to be looking over their shoulders the entire time. So I certainly wouldn't be looking at doing anything like that. But I think what we're more talking here is if Rohit doesn't play. But as I said, I just can't believe Rohit's the only one. I think Virat plays. Well, I should say, I think Virat is available, and I think India pick him. The Rohit one, I would only just question, as I said, if he gets in the nets and he's just like, I don't know, this isn't working the way I was hoping it would work, right? Then I think things change quite dramatically.
AJ brings up our next point, that is the wicketkeeper slot, and he says, do you see Rishabh Pant playing? He did struggle initially in the Test series against Australia, but the last 3 innings, he did churn up runs and in very different styles, so proved that he's fit to do both. Do you see Rishabh Pant featuring in the squad?
Yeah, I actually think Rishabh Pant had a really good Test series. You say he failed instantly at the top. My memory is in that first innings, he was the one who made the runs when no one else looked like. I think it was him and Nitesh, wasn't it? I thought he batted really well on that first day. So yeah, he struggled a little bit at times. I mean, everyone was going to struggle in that series. His issue is, and we've seen this recently with almost every player in the world, if we're being honest, they just don't play enough cricket, one-day cricket anymore. And you're talking about throwing a player back in who, in his case, has played even less. So most players, there are a lot of people like Virat and Rohit and a lot of other, top-level one-day players from around the world who haven't played much one-day cricket so far this year. I know there's a couple of ODIs to come, but they haven't played many ODIs this year. But most of them played a ton last year, right? Rishabh didn't play any last year. Is that right? I think that's right. He wouldn't have played any since 2012. So you're putting a bet on his talent in a World Cup. In a Champions Trophy, in a trophy game, I should say. I'm not against that. I don't think it's like the worst situation I've ever seen. But I'm not 100%. Like, I'm not sure that you have to make that call. So that might come down to the way that they think about their squad. He's another left-hander. I mean, we've already had people in the comments talking again about getting Jaiswal in, right? Part of that is because he's a left-hander. So I've got no issue with the extra left-hander being available to them, but I'd find it interesting if they brought him straight back. So what the England and I can't remember. There was another country who really talked about this a lot. But what those players talked about was trying to find a rhythm in one-day cricket when you haven't played it. the tempo is slightly different of how hard you push, of how soft you push, and everything else. It doesn't quite fit the way that you would think it should, and that's the issue on that.
And probably in England's case, it gets further complicated because there's not enough list A, top players featuring in list A for them to pick from, even amongst the promising youngsters, because then there's the 100 happening.
I mean, around the world, how many players actually play list A anymore? Like international
Not
level
the top
players
players for sure.
Yeah, it's, it's why I always find it funny when every time a team loses now, people go, they should be playing more domestic cricket. And I was like, the team who just beat them don't play domestic cricket. No one plays domestic cricket anymore. Like, unless you're in
But
county
from
cricket
foundation point of view.
Sorry?
From foundation point of view, as in at least Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma, when they were young, they played fair bit of list A cricket before they graduated to international cricket. So
that's
the young crop.
Back those. Yeah,
amongst the young crop.
But at that stage, everyone did it, right?
Yeah.
And now no international players do that anymore. So there isn't, this isn't a situation where you suddenly think to yourself, if only we had more players doing this like the other teams are. No one is playing list A cricket, right? Like, it's really rare to have anyone playing. You occasionally get something like what Mitch Starc did, where and Jimmy Anderson would do this occasionally, and we've seen some of the South African players do this, of saying, I want to play 2 or 3 games of warm up before the tournament, right? Like, or before the series, or I want to get some overs in, or whatever. But even then, it's really rare for that to happen because it usually overlaps with something else, right? And in someone like Jimmy Anderson's case, it was more, he could do that because he wasn't playing 2 other formats of cricket, right? So it's really, really hard from that perspective to fit all of these things in. And that's what it comes down to. Indian batters haven't lost their form because they haven't played other domestic cricket, because lots of people haven't played other domestic cricket. They've lost their form for a myriad of other reasons. But it is, I think it's one of the big things going ahead with the IPL that's going to be interesting. My knowledge of the situation, and this is a little bit of reporting and a little bit of hearsay, and everything else, was that AB de Villiers was not worried about his ability to play at the IPL level for a little bit longer. His worry was whether he was going to play enough other cricket to stay at the level where he was going to be good at the IPL, right? And it's the same with MS Dhoni. If MS Dhoni played 2 other leagues a year, he would probably keep his eye in a little bit more and be more useful to his team. But he probably doesn't want to, right? Like, and as an Indian player, he can play a little bit longer than an overseas player can from that perspective. So there is definitely an element of keeping your eye in. But if you think about international players, think about what Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma have done over the last couple of months with nets. They've played multiple different people, the Champions Trophy, there'll be warm-ups that they will probably play in as well. And that's the case for Shubman Gill or Rishabh Pant if they want to use him. Like, they can be flexible with that sort of stuff. The idea of going back to domestic cricket is kind of gone at this point.
Probably India that ways are in some sort of advantageous position because they do not allow their youngsters, or anybody for that matter, non-retired players, to feature in other leagues. So if a domestic tournament is happening and if the fringe players have not been selected in the squad, they have to feature in whatever is happening. And when Shreyas Iyer and Ishan Kishan did not feature in the Ranji Trophy, they obviously got reprimanded for that. So at least out of compulsion or whatever, they are playing across formats in the domestic circuit. In the meanwhile, we get back to Rishabh Pant question because there are multiple comments on that. Mac Go says, dropping KL for Pant is not simple too. KL averages 15 ODIs and had a decent ODI World Cup. Now, not necessarily dropping him, but also fitting in Pant. How? We try and figure that out.
Even if you keep KL in, I don't think it's a straight situation, which I think is another decent comment. Like, it's, and this is the problem that India is going to run into now is going to be similar to the sorts of problems that Australia used to have, back consistently, which is sometimes there's too much talent. And so what happens is you end up chopping and changing quite a bit and no one feels that comfortable in the side. And so, that's another issue that India might have, with this particular tournament. Generally what you would do is you would go to the more experienced players who've been playing the format That doesn't happen anymore, right? Because the more experienced players haven't been playing the format, and it doesn't quite work the way that it wants to. It should be pointed out though, I'm sure a lot of Indian fans are worried. This isn't just an Indian thing. There just wasn't as much one day cricket played in 2024 because there was a T20 World Cup, and that's now how the cycle works, right?
Yeah. And the World Test Championship qualification. So every team was focused, at least top 5 teams were focused on that. In the meanwhile, there's a comment from Rahul about domestic cricket, how the quality of bowling is not top notch, also because it's slightly diluted, considering the number of teams that feature in each of these tournaments. Now, Shreyas Iyer also marks his presence in this conversation. Good to great reminds us of him and says Gill and Iyer are good, but more of one-dimensional players. I don't want both of them to occupy key slots. What do you say, Jarrod?
I mean, Gill averages over 50 in ODI cricket, and one-dimensional. No, I'm not too worried about it. Iyer's a little bit different, but if you look at Iyer's skill set here and what he does, he's certainly still in a position where. Yeah, he's certainly still in a position where you would say to yourself, on these sort of, I was going to say Pakistani pitches, but UAE pitches, I suppose, in this case, he could still be a very, very handy player in certain situations. So I could see why they would be looking at a situation like that as well. Like, I don't think there's any massive issue with picking someone like him in, but you also need specialists, right? You need those one skill people as well. So I think I'm not against Iyer as well. I'm actually quite fascinated to see what they think, because we saw the South Africa series recently. I remember Australia, to get back to the great Australian sides, they would kind of get a little bit, I don't want to say confused, because confused is the wrong way of putting it, but they would get a little bit jumpy because they wouldn't play their main sides quite a bit. They play all the backups who do really well, and then they get to a tournament and they'll be like, should we pick some of the backups over the experienced players? And you can almost double think yourself in that situation. And I could see how India would be in a situation like that. I just brought up the numbers here as well. So last year there was 104 ODIs played, and a great deal of those, I should say, were between non-test playing nations. The year before there was 218 ODIs played. Right, so you can see the change that we've had, and that's why. And to go back to, was it Rahul was talking about domestic cricket? So Indian domestic cricket is still fairly strong, and so is Australian domestic cricket. So is English and South African, especially when you come to bowlers. Pakistan you would throw up there as well, but you don't usually get 5 top level bowlers, and so it's not the same. Having said that, domestic cricket was the way that people prepared for major cricket for the rest of the history of the game, right, Megha? Like that's why the old people are very upset, because they're looking around going, well, they should be playing more domestic cricket. And it's like, well, if they're not playing domestic cricket and their opposition isn't, it's kind of a wash at a certain point, right? But you understand why people bring this up, but it is a very, very different situation when it comes to who you're facing. So if you play in a List A game, you're probably going to face one good bowler in a List A game, maybe 2, and then it's either going to be, you're going to have a couple of part-timers who wouldn't even bowl. I shouldn't even call them part-timers, all-rounders who wouldn't even bowl in international cricket, who you're going to be facing, right? Have a look at, don't look at the Bangladesh Premier League, or the Big Bash. Look at some of the bowling lineups. Like the Big Bash went in the other night. I think it was the Sydney Thunder. They had Hasnain from Pakistan, who's like a bit of a project player. They had Wes Agar, who's like Wes Agar at best is a fringe international player. They had Chris Green, right, who, if he couldn't bat and field, probably wouldn't get, I'm not saying he's a bad bowler, but probably, wouldn't be that level player. And then they had players beneath them as well. That is what your domestic lineup is. It doesn't test you in the same way. So having half as many ODI games as we had the previous year means that these players are not playing in this format as much. And so it's a big issue for how you actually get good at it. It's not that these players are not used to batting. It's not that they're not used to playing against good bowlers, but there are parts to the game at the moment that they can't prepare for. Even these warm-up games that are coming up, people are not going to be playing at 100% all the way through.
And that's an issue that all the teams would be facing. Not enough ODI cricket in the build-up to the Champions Trophy.
Yep.
Now, can we shift our attention now to the Australian squad? Or do you want to give a closing remark on the pace attack, or rather the bowling attack, Akshar versus Jadeja, or both in the 11, both in the squad certainly, and Bumrah not 100% at the moment after what happened in the last test, Sydney test, doesn't look really comfortable. Mohammad Shami has been bowling in the Vijay Hazare Trophy in the previous game, had a fair bit of momentum in the second part of his bowling, in the second spell, but initially looked rusty. So what does it look like to you?
Yeah, I think it's... Sorry, pardon me. I think it's really interesting the way that they go about it. I think India have ended up with a really big kind of second bowler problem, haven't they? So let's assume that Bumrah is fit. So I think India are a 50% chance to win this tournament according to the bookies, last time I checked, right? Which is huge. What chance will you give them if Bumrah can't play?
How does that... Doesn't it entirely alter the dynamics?
Yeah. Does it go to 66% chance or 25? I'll do that again. 33% chance or 25% chance, right? Like how far does it change things? And I think we know in these conditions he's going to be pretty special again, as long as he's fully fit, as you said before. So if he plays, but what Mohammad Siraj turns up, if it's the Mohammad Siraj from the last ODI World Cup, then even Bumrah being injured, I wouldn't be too worried, right? But if it's the Mohammad Siraj, with the Asia Cup, and he had a couple of big spells in the World Cup as well, didn't he?
Against Sri Lanka,
Yeah, well, I suppose that was just Sri Lanka. But you look at that bowling lineup they had in the ODI World Cup, which was him, Shami, and Bumrah. The current Siraj, we don't know if we're going to see that Siraj.
Yeah.
Shami, I'm assuming, will not play. I don't know if that might change. And Bumrah, we're not 100% sure if he will play or be fully fit all the way through the tournament as it currently stands, right? And they're not the only team with these issues, of course. Australia has lots of issues with their fast bowlers as well. Pat Cummins and Josh Hay. Mitchell Starc was the one who looked the most injured in the BGT, and somehow the other two are the most injured. So you've then got someone like Arshdeep as potentially your second bowler, right? Arshdeep, I'm a huge fan of Arshdeep. Second bowler in one-day cricket. Again, they're a 50% chance of winning this tournament. If I told you that Arshdeep was your second most important seam bowler, would you still feel comfortable that they're a 50% chance? Probably not, right? So I think there's lots of interesting things when you look at their bowling attack all the way through.
AJ says Bumrah can play directly in the finals. One is reminded of that Pakistan game in the T20 World Cup and the finals.
Yeah, I mean, if Bumrah is fit, he can play, right? But Bumrah on his own, I think is great. The greatness of their last bowling attack in the ODI World Cup, which they should have won that tournament, and partly based on the bowling, was the fact that they had 3 top-level bowlers that you could trust that could destroy, right? So 2 of them didn't get hit that much, and the other one was a weapon of mass destruction against Sri Lanka and occasionally against other sides, right? It meant that playing them, especially under lights, was impossible, right? They got that new ball under light, and you were like, great, what are we going to do here? So that no longer looks like a strength. Maybe it all assembles by the time the finals come around. But right at the moment, I think you'd have to be pretty optimistic to say that India has a 50% chance of winning that tournament.
Time for a quick break. On the other side, Australian squad, finally.
Come to cricket8.com to spin the wheel as we start to launch our free fun cricket games. There are prizes to be won for the top spinners, and you can also stick around for all the live scorecards and all of our content.
Welcome back. So McSweeney gets a call to again be a part of the test squad, and obviously Constas is there. Glenn Maxwell, for all the hopes and ambitions that he was banking upon, does not feature, and probably it's the end of his test career, because if not Sri Lanka, then where? And Australia would also be touring India in 2027. So a lot of it is also looking ahead. But then do you think the squad would have been the same had Australia not qualified for the WTC after the conclusion
Uh,
of the Border Gavaskar Trophy?
no, I'm not sure we'd see players like Cooper Connolly.
Yeah.
I think we would have seen either Maxwell or Hanscom play in there. You might have seen you might have seen another slightly older spinner as well. I'm not sure that they would go Agar again, but maybe it'd be Swepson or anything or someone else. Like I think they would have gone in a slightly different direction there as well. But yeah, I think this is the squad that they're very much in the same way that South Africa, once they qualified, they started playing things around as well, didn't they?
Hmm. Hmm. Travis said there are reports suggesting that he might just open as well. So, how do you see the lineup shaping up? Because Sweeney is otherwise a middle order batter, but he had to open because there was no other option at that moment. With Constance looking good at the top, how do you see the 11 shaping up?
Yeah, I find that interesting. I don't have a problem with Head opening in Asia. I think they feel that if he starts against spin, he's going to struggle a lot more. And if he doesn't start against spin, or if he starts against the new ball and spin, he's going to be in a much better position, I think, from that point of view. But yeah, I think they're very, very worried about him coming in, starting against spin, and just going from ball one. So we know that he's used to starting against the new ball. I know the white ball acts differently to the red one, but the white ball, he's used to that job. I find it weird though, because I'm not sure what they learn out of Head opening, because I think he's done it in India before,
Yeah.
right? I think he did it in the last 2 tests of that last series, or 3, I can't remember now. And I think there's a part for me where I would think to myself, well, are you not better off to try and see what Constance does early on? And is there not more to gain and more to learn by doing that than any other side of it? But apparently they've gone a different way. But who knows how that will go.
And you're not as desperate to win the test. You're obviously in a strong position, but the WTC final slot is sealed. Now, Crunk is reminding us that it's probably the end of Marsh's test career. Green likely to be fit around March. And considering the amount of workload that Webster can shoulder, he already has a decade of domestic experience and can also chip in with off spin, which is pretty bizarre for a pacer to do.
They've got so many options as well, right? Like they've got younger players coming through, Aaron Hardy and Will Sutherland as well. Like there's just so many all-roundery options coming through. It's probably the one position that Australia is overstocked in at the moment. Head had that great year, and coming into that series, let's not forget, all the people slandering him were like, why is he playing? And it's like, because he's been making lots of runs. So I think at the moment, it just doesn't make sense for Marsh to play in Test cricket. He was in the side in part because Marsh came back in and made runs when Cameron Green was struggling, and then Cameron Green picked up injuries as well. So he did so well that they stuck around with him. I think now, with the other options that they have available to them, as you said, Webster is the most obvious one. Green will come back, and then they have kind of 1 or 2 backups available to them as well. It doesn't really make sense to go back to someone like Marsh. He's going to captain the T20 side for a while. He's a very important white ball player. But honestly, it'd be interesting. He's now had a pretty good test career, as in he's played quite a few games. If I was Cricket Australia, I'd just go to him and be like, we just don't feel comfortable with you playing. Like, if you're going to lead our T20 side, we don't feel comfortable with you playing a test match, bowling a 10 overs and injuring yourself, and then you not being around for ages, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where he gets himself injured. You don't want to be in a situation where you lose him. And so I think you have to be smart with him and just, make that conversation. If it was a position where they didn't have like 12 other options, right? I'd be like, because he could be a very important player. When he's not traveling like he's like a 73-year-old person with diabetes and broken bones and with a stroller, he's quite a decent bowler still. but he's not like that, right? So I just don't think you're in any position where you have to use him in that way.
Umang has dug up the numbers, had made 9, 49, 32, 90 opening in India. Initially wasn't selected, and then once Australia didn't do well, they realized that they needed head.
They were
And then
terrified. I'll let you know this, that they, I remember this at the time of, they were almost didn't take him to India because they thought his batting against spin was so poor. They were like, well, how is he going to be a backup if our frontliners can't do it? And in the end, it was more of a thing of, they went, well, let's just send him up the top and give him a license to hit and see what happens. And that was kind of, I wouldn't say it was the beginning, because I think at that stage they were confident enough when they were originally not going to take him, I think they thought that one more bad series, like against India, where he averages like 12 or something, might be the end of him. And by the time they selected that squad, they were like, do you know what? He's so confident now. He just isn't that guy that even a bad series won't matter. And that's the player we have seen ever since, right? That guy who's just like, oh, okay, well, that hasn't worked for me. I'll keep going from there.
And then came the ODI World Cup in India, where they waited for Head to recover, and then he recovered and did whatever he did in the finals.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were talking about Boland as well. In the comment section, that conversation has been happening pretty frequently. He did so well in Australia, has been so strong at home. How do you see him fare in Sri Lanka? He's very disciplined. Even when there's not much on offer from the wicket, he maintain his line and length. And Norman is asking, we saw how Ururke did in Sri Lanka. Others were really struggling, but he stood out. So do you see Boland kind of replicating what he did in Australia, what Ururke did in Sri Lanka?
Someone might need to remind me in the comments, but are both of these games in Gaul? I think, if I'm not mistaken, they might be. Do you remember?
They are. I'll cross-check. Yeah, I think they are, yes.
Yeah, so I can't imagine Boland is going to have a big impact in Gaul, just because the wickets generally aren't like that. And O'Rourke was a little bit different, because O'Rourke is a bowler who is a little bit faster, a little bit more wayward, gets more sort of staggering bounce and everything else. So I don't really see them as a like for like. The bowler who usually does great against Sri Lanka and in Sri Lanka is Mitchell Starc. Sri Lankans have a genetic disposition to not wanting to face Mitchell Starc. Like, I cannot tell you, I'm not sure what his bowling average is against Sri Lanka in Test cricket, Megha, but I think it's minus. Like, he really has tormented them. So if you're looking for a seamer, and if you think about him, he is actually a lot more like Will O'Rourke, in that he's taller and a little bit more wild and everything. But in Sri Lanka, like, this is in Sri Lanka, remember, not for seamers. He's played 5 test matches and has a bowling average of 17.48. Right? Like, he's specifically been great in Sri Lanka over his career. So I think he's the one who's going to have more of an effort and more of an impact on that. But Boland's job might just be to, bowl at the other end, right? And bowl for him. What Boland should allow is for teams not to get away from him. And if you're attacking through Stark's end and you're not getting away, and then they get overs out of Webster, I don't think Cooper Connolly will play, but if they get overs out of some of the other players, Travis Head, I suppose, is another one. Marnus could come in and bowl his bounces. However they do that's probably enough for them. What would be interesting is if they ever want to get to a position where they just want to bowl the one frontline seamer. So you have Webster at one end, and then you have, so Australia, I don't think they've done that in my memory. And I wouldn't necessarily always suggest that. But in this particular case, they might have done it with Cameron Green, but Cameron Green's more like a frontline bowler. But they might have... I know they've talked about it before, and they've thought about those sorts of things, about how it fits in. But they haven't really been committing to that for a while. I think if Green was playing, and Green and Webster, they might do it. But without those, they're probably going to go with the 2 seamers. But I don't think they have a backup seamer, do they? I know it doesn't take long to fly people out there, but they don't have a third seamer in that, which suggests to me they're more likely to think about playing one-seamer lineups than they have before and rely on Webster to just bowl the Jacob Oram overs, wobble them around a little bit at the other end.
And also with Boland, probably the way to dominate him is the way Sri Lanka, rather England did it. They were absolutely dominant against him because otherwise, what's the way through him? He's not played as much international cricket as a player of his talent should or would have. But if he is the only seamer, considering that he at the moment looks fit and fine, and by the time we get to the second test, we don't know how much of whom Australia wants to preserve for the Champions Trophy and the World Test Championship. So probably in the second test, and yeah, both the tests are at the same venue at Gaul.
Yeah. I think the whole thing's quite interesting because Australia don't really want to put that much pressure on anyone at that point, do they? Like, I mean, they don't want any of their bowlers to over bowl here. And so, they got Sean Abbott in the squad. Sorry, I missed Sean Abbott before. So they do have someone, I suppose, they could bring in as another seamer.
And sturdy.
Yeah, I mean, but that's not the normal frontline attack, is it? Like, it's a big difference from the normal one. So, look, I think they do have to be quite clever in this series. I don't think they want to be in a situation where they are over bowling. I don't think Mitchell Starc needs to bowl more than 20 overs in a day on any of these days. What will be interesting is what happens when the game is there to be won, whether they move back a little bit at that point and they say to themselves, no, we'd rather worry about the World Test Championship than beating Sri Lanka. They've also got the Champions Trophy is after this, isn't it? So, again, Starc is probably going to be there as well.
Absolutely. You need him for the knockouts if you qualify for it, for sure.
Oh, and just to get back to your Boland point that you started with that question. So on Boland, I wouldn't be as worried about over bowling him because of the World Test Championship is so far away. What I am interested to see is how Sri Lanka play him and whether they attack and charge down the wicket, because they've been quite an attacking team at times as well.
And you see Kamindu Mendis's averages further rising from here, because at the moment it stands at 77. Midway through last year, it was around 90. Do you see him taking it further from here? Because that's the Sri Lankan batter you cannot help talking about.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated to see how he goes and how successful he is against, a team like this. It's not I don't think it's like a straightforward situation, is it? Like he like Jaiswal, they pick the ball up so early that I find it hard to see either of them not being very good players for their country, right? That should be the flaw. Things can go wrong, everything, but that should be the flaw for both those players. I don't think Mendes' ceiling is quite as high as Jaiswal's, but he has the ability to be a top 5 or a top 10 all-time batter for Sri Lanka, right? Perhaps higher than that, but that should be where the sort of minimum you should be aiming. What we need to see now is he's been around long enough and teams have started to work out, a bit like they have to Jaiswal, that you can hang the ball wide to him. And it's funny to me that Mendes, Jaiswal and Harry Brook all have the same issue, which is exactly what everyone's having a go at Virat Kohli for, which is they just can't stop touching those. They're just going to go after those wide balls. I want to see how that plays out against Australia, because Australia have become, like, for a long period of time, England were the best team at sort of preparing for a side, of like thinking months in advance, we're going to bowl here and this is what we're going to do. Australia's really become that side over the last little while. They'll be thinking about this with Mendes. And so I'm fascinated to see how he goes. I remember him playing against O'Rourke, and O'Rourke just pushing the ball across from either from over the wicket or around the wicket, and just saying, you're eventually going to edge one of these balls. So it's fascinating to see how that might go.
Just to conclude this conversation, very refreshing to see a very young Australian squad. We don't see a whole lot of these in tests. That's something that we've gotten accustomed to with baseball and England, but not maybe so much in Australia's case. All right, then, Jarrod, do you have more time? Can we get more time and comments out of you, or should we conclude?
You want to
I'm
ask me a
always
couple more
greedy.
questions?
Great.
We can
So
do 3
there are a lot of
last
comments
questions
here.
if you want. Come on, pick good ones,
Absolutely.
Omega. Don't stuff up. No pressure.
Don't put pressure on me. You've already, but there's one directed directly to you. Who do you think will top score for Australia in the 2 tests versus Sri Lanka?
I think being that Jayasuriya is their best bowler, you'd kind of put your money on either Khawaja or Head. You're probably looking at a left-hander. I'm still worried about Khawaja's form over the last year. I know some of it was Bumrah of recent times, as he pointed out, but he was struggling beforehand. So I'd probably go Head, just because Jayasuriya is such a good player. But Steve Smith looked in really good form as well. But left arm finger spin, even at his best, could cause him issues in Asia.
Jarrod was very specific in pointing out, Megha, not your questions in the comment section.
You can ask me questions, Megha, if you want.
No, I've taken the message. AJ is highlighting that probably it should be more about backing your strength than focusing or obsessing over the conditions. Do you belong to the same school of thought?
Look, the whole thing of do Asian teams go away from their strengths and do Western teams go away from their strengths when they tour is kind of true. I always go back to the old Australian teams that would turn up with like Gavin Robertson and Nathan Horitz and be like, well, are you going to outbowl Harbhajan Singh, are you? On flat pitches. Like, it's a little bit different if the pitch is raggy, but on a flat pitch, that just seems unrealistic, would be the term I would have. Whereas I always thought that the teams could go to their strengths. I do think of recent times, the pitches, to me, feel like it's very hard on some of these pitches to do that. Like, for instance, I think you can make a good call that Jadeja and Ashwin could have played in the Test series against Australia. I don't know how you bowl them, right? So at a certain point, you do have to play the conditions that you have in front of you. But if you look at the entire history of cricket, I do think this is something that teams get wrong quite a bit.
Final question, because you mentioned 3. So there's a third one. Noor Hassan, because we started with the Champions Trophy squad, that conversation. Which of the two? Chakravarti has picked up 2 fifers in Vijay Hazare Trophy. His team has been knocked out in the quarterfinals, but is looking good as well. Was brilliant in the T20 series against South Africa. Do you think deserves a long run or a run in ODIs? And Akshar Jadeja, we have seen enough of them in the format and otherwise. So,
I'm interested in which direction you would go, because I remember that you and Ravi Jadeja dropped before the BGT, and I know it's a different format, but what 2 spinners would you pick?
in the T20 World Cup as well, India had both Akshar and Jadeja. And in the format, we saw in the ODI World Cup as well, subcontinent, not very different conditions, as in obviously it's not a tour outside the subcontinent. They're both very handy. Bishnoi, not so much, too much of googlies in his case. Washington and Chakravarti, they make the conversation complicated. Kuldeep, obviously, for all the good things that he has done, somehow keeps falling off the radar because somebody else does better.
Is he
it's
fit
complicated.
at the moment? Was he not injured
Kuldeep-
recently? I don't even know.
Well, yes, he was. He was.
He was? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if he's fit, he's automatic for me. But if he's not fit, obviously, then that gets a little bit trickier. Bishnoi is an interesting one for me, based on... I don't see what his advantages are over anyone else in this list. So if Kuldeep's fit, obviously you go Kuldeep. If not, I'm not sure I take Bishnoi over Chakravarti. I think Chakravarti has become a much better flat pitch bowler than he ever has been before. So I think he's a much better bowler than when he previously bowled for India. So I would have him as my backup for Kuldeep, if that is the case. And then I would probably have Akshar and Washington both in the squad if I can physically fit them in. Because I think you need more than 2. I think you need 3 spinners. If you're playing in the UAE, I don't think just having 2 spinners in your squad is enough. And then Washington will have to play as a backup batter, or Akshar as a backup batter. And then you've got one that spins either way. I haven't looked at Jadeja's recent form, but if they pick Jadeja over Akshar, I wouldn't be too worried about that. But I just feel that Akshar is probably slightly more suited to the way that they're trying to play at the moment. A little bit there, but yeah.
Jadeja was handy with the bat in the previous World Cup in some of the games, the game against England. So because of what I said last time around, I have to kind of cover it up and balance it. In the meanwhile, I think we are pretty much done. Do let us know in the comments section what your squad would look like for the Champions Trophy. As of now, we are signing off. Next week, there'd be a couple of other podcasts to have further on what the squad looks like and should have looked like. Meanwhile, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much, Jarrod. We'll see you again next week.
Remember to support us by subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.